So here we are at the United Nations with Matt Gianni, the policy advisor to the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. Matt, what are we here at the United Nations for this week?
Well, we're here because the UN General Assembly has convened an oceans conference to decide on international action needed to protect deep species and ecosystems on the high seas of the world's oceans. That is, all of the oceans that exist or lie beyond countries' national waters. And this is a very large area of the planet. The high seas constitute about 2/3 of the world's oceans, or about 50% of the surface of the Earth.
And then what is the state of protection for marine biodiversity on the high seas?
Well, there are a number of threats to marine biodiversity on the high seas, and they come from a variety of different activities such as ocean noise, marine pollution, the up-and-coming potential for seabed mining. But the biggest single threat we see is overexploitation of fish stocks and the indiscriminate and often destructive way that fishing is conducted on the high seas. Our particular focus is the fishing in the deep ocean areas. We're talking about areas of the high seas that are 200, 300, 400 meters deep and deeper, down to 1,000 to 2,000 meters, where fishing boats currently engage in so-called bottom fishing, deep sea trawling across seamounts, in canyon systems, on ocean ridge systems, looking for populations of fish, often very slow growing, very slow reproducing fish, to satisfy the international demand for seafood products.
And what can the United Nations do to protect the deep sea life?
Well, the United Nations General Assembly is the highest political authority for the management and the governance of activities happening on what in effect are the global oceans commons. The high seas of the world's oceans don't belong to any nations. They are a common property of humankind. And so the General Assembly itself is the forum where major issues concerning biodiversity protection, the rule of international law, the need for multilateral cooperation, the need to equitably share in the benefits to be derived from exploiting the high seas, all come together and are debated by foreign affairs ministries, fisheries ministries, environment ministries, and other ministries from all member nations of the United Nations, including, in fact, the so-called landlocked states. Under international law, even states that don't have a coastline have a right to have a say in how species and ecosystems are conserved and protected on the global oceans commons.
And have all these countries had a say? Have they decided anything in the past?
Well, certainly not all 191 countries are involved in the debate this week, but a majority of the member nations of the United Nations are participating in these negotiations. And in fact, this is part of an ongoing process of negotiation that has really gotten underway in earnest since the early part of the past decade, since about 2000 or 2001. There have been a number of resolutions agreed by the General Assembly over the course of the last several years on managing deep sea fisheries to protect deep sea ecosystems and biodiversity. And these resolutions have committed the relatively small number of countries that actually do this type of fishing on the high seas to either ensure that it's sustainable and ensure that the fisheries that they allow to occur protect biodiversity in the marine environment, or else to stop the boats from fishing.
And how well have these resolutions been implemented?
Well, the reality is they haven't been terribly well implemented. In some areas of the world's oceans, some protective measures have been put into place, but it's been partial at best. And a lot of the high seas are still open to fishing, to deep sea fishing, and highly vulnerable to the kind of damage that can be caused if, for example, you're trawling a heavy set of trawl gear over the top of a seamount covered in corals and sponges and other rich habitat-forming species that live in the deep sea and provide the kinds of ecosystems that house a whole range of species, including species of commercial importance. What we've seen in terms of our review of what countries have done and not done to implement the resolutions, that around the Southern Ocean, in the Southern Ocean, I should say, around Antarctica, most of what the UN General Assembly has called for has been effectively implemented. But in other ocean regions, in the North Pacific, in the South Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and in the Atlantic Ocean, while some action has been taken, the actions that have been taken to date fall far short of what states have actually committed to do through the UN General Assembly process.
So this week, what is the DSCC hoping to come out of this meeting?
What we're hoping to see come out of this meeting is, number one, a renewed commitment on the part of the high seas fishing nations to either implement the resolutions effectively, ensure that if they let their boats go out and deep sea fish on the high seas, that they will do so in a way that protects biodiversity in the deep sea and ensures that they're not overexploiting these highly vulnerable, in many cases, deep sea species. But equally important, if not more importantly, that most of the other nations that are here that are not doing this type of fishing on the high seas hold the deep sea fishing nations accountable to what they've agreed to do through the UN General Assembly resolutions adopted over the last several years, going back at least to 2006 and actually to 2004 and earlier.
Great. Thanks, Matt.
You're welcome.